Hello, and welcome to Sound and Image Lab, the Dolby Institute podcast. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Today, I am pleased to welcome the filmmaking team behind Genius, a Kanye trilogy, the new three-part documentary about Kanye West from directors Coodie Simmons and Chike Oza, which debuted earlier this year at the Sundance Film Festival and is now available on Netflix. I got to speak with Coodie and Chike about their collaboration on this Kanye West documentary and how it began 20 years ago. And here they are now, after having shot over 500 hours of material for this documentary. And it is some of the most intimate behind-the-scenes footage of an artist I think that you will ever see. Joining us in conversation today is our old friend, the supervising sound editor and re-recording mixer of the film, Paul Shue, who you might remember was on our show just a few months ago talking about Tick, Tick, Boom with Lin-Manuel Miranda. He's back again today to talk about the Kanye documentary and to tell us how he weaved his sonic magic under some pretty incredible circumstances. This is the definition of a run-and-gun documentary. Most of the footage shot by Coodie Simmons himself on a single digital video camera, often with just a shotgun mic to capture sound. And so it was a big challenge for Paul to take all that material from over 20 years of capture and build it out into a really full and immersive 5.1 soundtrack. And so you'll get to hear how that process went. And this was a difficult film to make, and it took a long time. And so I was really eager to start the conversation by asking Coodie, who did his first interview with Kanye back in 1998 in Chicago as part of a cable access channel. Within a couple years of that first interview, Coodie had basically moved to New York and dedicated himself to making this documentary about Kanye West, who was an artist at that time that nobody had really heard of before. So I started off by asking Coodie what he saw about Kanye back in those early days that made him want to dedicate himself to making this film.
Well, I didn't know at the time that, just following signs, it's like God give you signs. And I just kept running into Kanye, but I seen how talented he was and how charismatic he was. And when we did go around him with a camera, he loved the camera. And then, fast forward to when I seen Hoop Dreams, I knew Kanye was the perfect candidate to document, because I seen Grammys, something I seen, the vision that I seen with him. And I never really quit my job because I was doing stand-up comedy. So I just focused more on filmmaking than I did comedy, but I still had to get some money to even live in New York,
Yeah, that was one of the questions I had when I was watching the film, which is you're doing this for years. How are you living? How are you kind of keeping afloat while you're making this film?
Well, thank God I was married at the time, so my ex-wife was working, and I was a professional comedian, so I was traveling the world doing comedy. Even when I moved there, I would go back to Chicago often until I just said, you know what, I just have to stick in New York. I can't keep going back, and this one guy was like, he told me, he said, Coodie, if you want to make it, you have to have a final destination. You got to have a place that you're trying to go, a major goal. And he was like, I think you're a filmmaker. I was throwing parties. I was doing comedy, acting. It was like I was all over the place. But he said, but if you direct, think about this. You can be the actor in your movie, or you can, even like Genius now, I'm like a part of that story. So he was right.
And then obviously, you brought Chike in when you guys were working on the Through the Wire video, and that became, part of the collaboration. And now you guys have a very successful production company that you run together. But I'm curious for the two of you, and you too, Chike, how do you guys work together? And so what's the process of directing together? Because I think people are kind of curious about that. And how do you navigate it when you disagree creatively?
I mean, I think it's a blessing that we both have respect each other's strengths, and we understand what our strengths are. And we just try to cater to those. Coodie's an amazing storyteller. He's amazing with beats and timing. I believe a lot of it has to deal with just him being a stand-up comedy and either hitting beats or you getting booed. So he had, you know what I'm saying? But, for me, I went to art school and I come from packaging. I was doing packaging at MTV. And I'm really big on just how we're telling the story visually, through whether it's, through all the details, through, color, sound, we hear with Paul, and different elements like that of how those really impact the storytelling. And then when we're on set, Coodie's is more social. He's a sociable person. And so he's really good with talent. And we were on a set, he's usually dealing directly with talent. I'm dealing with, the DPs and camera and looking behind at the screen a lot. And then we switch up, you know what I mean? But we just, like I said, we know what to expect from each other and what weight to put on each other for what areas we shine in. And then at times, like I said, Coodie, he's still very, very well versed in how the visual storytelling is, and he can do that at the highest level and vice versa. But, for us, I just think it helps our sets move fluidly because there's not that much pressure put on one individual person to command an entire set. And all our sets run relatively smooth because of that. And we can get more accomplished, I think, than in just an individual person. So
I wanted to ask you guys, the visual style of the movie changes quite a lot as we go through the years. And obviously I think that's because, Coodie, I think you've got your original camera there, don't you, that you started off shooting with?
Well, this is what I started filming Kanye with. I moved to New York. I got this. We had a GL1 as well. The Source magazine gave me a GL1 because we were like doing stuff, because they fell in love with Channel Zero, a TV show in Chicago, that they gave us a camera. But the crazy thing about that is I got carjacked before I moved to New York, and the camera was in the car, that camera. But it was a blessing in disguise because if it wasn't for that carjacking, I might have not made it to New York, because that's what really gave me the chunk of change of money, because I just bought a condo and I had my car. So when they carjacked, my insurance, my homeowner's insurance gave me the money for whatever was in the car and the car. But instead of buying another car and another camera at the time, I went and bought this one. But I moved to New York, and that like I say, was a blessing in disguise. So. But, at first it was the VHS camera, the big one that you hold up here like this. So, but Danny Swords was mainly filming that, the other co-owner of Channel Zero. Yeah.
That's amazing. So, and obviously the look of the film progresses quite a bit as you replace your cameras and get better gear. Mm-hmm. And also I think you probably get more confident in your skills and whatnot and shooting as you go through. Mm-hmm. And then of course, it gets to HD and all this, but if you listen, it sounds amazing all the way back to the original footage in 2000. And I have a feeling that that's not the way those tracks came out of your camera. So that's where we want to bring Paul in. I'm just kind of curious, like, that original material that you shot way back in, 98, early 2000s, how were you capturing on set? You got that camera. Were you just using the onboard microphone on the camera? How did you capture sound?
Yeah, a lot on board. But then too, I did this one tour, Electric Moyo with Nissan. And when I shot the whole tour, came back, footage was amazing, everything was amazing, but the audio wasn't. So they was mad at me. But I said, man, y'all hired me to film. I'm not an audio guy, I'm a film guy. So I was filming. I wasn't thinking about the audio. So that was a blessing in disguise as well, because then after that, besides this, Mama West, Donda bought me a camera, a Sony, the HD, and they had the plug-ins on the side where I had a boom mic that I bought, because after that experience, I was like, okay, I got to pay attention to sound. Thank God for that. So I had that connection, but all credit to Paul though, because Paul really made the sound happen. Everything else, I didn't know much other than that. What you say, Paul?
No, so to be clear though, Coodie, at no point, maybe at some point in all the footage, when is there a separate location sound mixer there? Almost never, right? You have your external mic, but and that's the thing I think, and it's funny because I'm actually at this very moment we're petitioning the TV Academy Board, the Emmys, because Coodie is supposed to be on the nomination with me for mixer, right? Because he recorded all that sound. Like that, he was
the production sound mixer too, right? Yeah,
and it's in the great tradition of like those old school documentarians. He recorded. He just got really good signal to noise ratio, and it's like that. Even if the technology wasn't great, he did the right thing in those scenes. Just like he knows where to point the camera, he got a good track, which then allowed me to do more with it. And it wasn't fancy, but that's in a way the beginner's luck of like how you record good sound. Just don't let it overmodulate. Just get a good level. And Coody did that the entire time. Like there's so much good audio that he recorded just because he had his wits about him.
I'm glad to hear you say that. There's a great quote from Paul Walter Murch, the famous picture editor and sound designer, and he I'm going to mangle this, but he says something like, we've trained audiences over the years to accept different film grain and mixture of video formats, and just that's part of your artistic style with the image. But if you put degraded sound in front of an audience, they just presume that you're technically incompetent and you don't know what you're doing. That's not an artistic choice. So Paul, you said that the tracks were good, but I mean, you must have done some really some magic on some of that stuff, because these are very difficult shooting conditions. You're in cars, they're sitting there, they're talking while they've got music playing in cars. So there's just some very challenging audio environments. And so, Paul, how did you kind of approach the stuff and dig it out?
Well, there's definitely, there's a lot of manipulation going on. And to be clear, like, I differ with some of, my most respected, mentors of another time who don't believe in doing too much EQ. Believe me, I like a lot of EQ is a good thing, but the point is you have to have something to work with. And that's how I went about it. Coody provided a really good track. A lot of times it was really just one or two tracks. And then you have to just, manipulate the hell out of it, basically to get it to a place where it feels hyper realistic. But you can't do that if the track isn't solid to start with. And that's really like the very real technical signal to noise stuff, where the track doesn't have to sound particularly fancy, but as long as the information is there, it's akin to, because I always love the visual analogies. It's like taking a photo. If the shot is well composed and it's captured correctly, then you can do a lot with it. You can blow it up. You can scan it. You can recolor time it. And that's the audio equivalent. Like Coody gave me the information to work with. And then from there, we did a lot, but you can't do anything unless you've got that initial, information to work with. So yeah, it was a lot of stuff went into it, but the track was there. It was like and it's very similar to, because if you notice from the film, Coody's camera work is incredible. Like he just knows where to point the camera at all times. And I don't think he realizes, but as he would say, God is always pointing him in the right direction. And the same goes for audio. Like he just knew whenever they were about to press play on the track in the studio at the Hit Factory at an ungodly level, something told him to turn the gain down, and he just did. And so cut to us mixing the movie that was there to work with. And if he hadn't done that, we wouldn't have had that option. So.
Right. Can I say one thing though? I was real concerned about the Donda. Donda, when she said the giant looks in the mirror and sees nothing, because it was like this air condition that was blowing extra hard, and I can't believe how Paul cleaned that up to how he cleaned it up, because that's the only thing I was really nervous. I'm like, it's too powerful, and I don't know anything. I didn't know to tell him to turn off the air conditioner, and or the music as you see half the time. So.
And the driving scenes as well. Right. There were some driving scenes that we were really concerned with. And what I feel like Paul did was he took our film and gave you a sound experience that brought our film more into a cinematic journey as opposed to just a documentary. Like it really make it feel like a film, because of the consistencies that he was able to create through all these eras, through all these conditions of what we were shooting in. And it made this thing that became seamless. And you didn't realize now, when we were stepping in and out of these different spaces, it wasn't so obvious, so.
Yeah, for sure. Chike, I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because I think the thing that really struck out to me is, as you're changing your visual style throughout the film, really the high quality of the sound and the fullness of the track is the connective tissue that really just kind of sets that baseline and lets you know that, we're taking a journey. And we're as an audience member, we're in good hands. I'm curious, Coody and Chike, how did you find Paul? How did you get him looped into this project? What was it about Paul that you responded to and made you think like, this is the guy that we want to do the sound work on this film?
Well, sound was super important to us in the beginning of the project. We were always very we didn't know who we were going to be working with yet, but we knew whoever we worked with, it was important that we worked with an artist more than we worked with just a sound person. You know what I'm saying? And so like those are sort of the mandates that came to our editors and to like our producers. So I know Sebastian at time, he was just rummaging through a lot of, potential collaborators for us. And so and Paul was in there, C5, his company. And then he sent us his work, and it was we saw an excerpt from The Five Bloods and I think Tick Tick Boom, and it was just definitely because The Five Bloods wasn't even my favorite. This is a perfect example. Five Bloods was not one of my favorite Spike Lee movies at all, and so as far as from the cinematic experience for me, but so the sound design work that Paul did in that film was amazing, and he just was able to his approach to some of those scenes, especially like in Vietnam, they were so artfully done. I felt like that's when we knew like, oh, this is our guy. Like he can take something and he has out the box thinking with sound, but it's not too far fetched to where it throws you all out the film. It's still pretty grounded. You know what I mean? And so, we were sold at that moment. And then once we met Paul, I was like, just personality wise, we all clicked.
Well, that's what I was going to say. We don't talk about that a lot, I think, in the industry, but it's like, certainly, I think the New York is very much about that. But in general, at least for me, there's a lot of like, you got to lead with the heart, right? And so like when you get people that you feel are coming from that same place, then you connect in that way. And then the technical stuff all sort of like fades in the background, and you hopefully you all bring whatever artistry you bring. And that for me, that was the experience. Like, the 2 seconds after I met these guys, I was like, oh, this is going to be great.
We were fortunate enough to have an editor in Max who's really like he pays attention to sound design. So like Paul can tell you when you got the first cut, like the references that were in there, we were paying attention to the sound just as much as we were to the image, as far as just trying to set a good precedent to give to somebody that could just raise the bar a whole nother level, which Paul did.
Yeah, no, Glenn, you and I have talked about this before on other projects, but it's like I'm always trying to make sure it's clear to everyone that, and especially on these kind of projects, so much of the sound design happens with the picture editor. And so, like Chica was saying, like Max, he lays this groundwork that is so essential. And then, when we're in the studio mixing the final, of course, we're bringing up a few more notches, we're bringing a whole other level to it. But it's like that the bones of the sound design, they happen with the capable picture editor so much of the time.
That's a great point. I'd love to just dig in on that a little bit more because, obviously, it's easy to talk about kind of the forensics and how to clean up the production audio and all that stuff. But you're working at obviously an entirely higher level in terms of sound design and that connective tissue that we were talking about. But Paul, tell me, like, is there sort of like maybe one or two favorite sequences that you really kind of got to maybe do a little bit more impressionistic sound design work in this very naturalistic documentary?
Well, the impressionistic stuff, I think, and again, Max really laid the groundwork for that stuff, and it's really about finding that emotional balance between Cootie's voiceover and the footage you're seeing and whatever sound design elements are happening. But for me, I got to say, all the studio scenes are really important because they really show Kanye when he's coming up and he's really struggling to make this work, which make all this art that we know now, but at the time nobody knew. And there's some fun sort of like existential stuff there too, because at the time that Cootie was shooting this, I was an intern at one of those studios, literally wanting to be a music engineer and a producer. Like I was in those same rooms listening to those same sounds at the same time. So for me, that it had to be exactly right? It had to be exactly that feeling when you're in the studio and a producer walks in and puts the tape in and plays it. And, they play it on 11 or 12 or 13, unquestionably. Like it's, that it's going to be, you're going to feel it in your chest. And so that for me, those scenes are really the ones that were like, they had to feel like you were there, and that's where the manipulation really came in, where, when you switch from a verite scene of just dialogue, and then the moment that someone presses play on the track and it's playing in the studio, that's where the manipulation started to take the track and really make it feel like you were there. And that all comes from just the source.
I mean, if you feel comfortable, I'd love for you to like kind of just pop the hood on that and tell us like, there's so many of those great sequences. Like, I mean, that sequence where he plays tracks with Pharrell for the first time, like.
Yo, G, you can't stop me from rapping, can it?
fire, man. Too much stuff on house right now, man. Are you bringing the final recording in and kind of rebuilding that track, or how are you actually pulling that magic off?
Almost never. And it's, that would be the obvious go-to. And we do it a couple times in very, very limited ways. But usually, and that's, I know I sound like I keep repeating myself, but it comes back to the Cootie recording. It's all signal to noise. If the information is there and you're not afraid of the EQ knob, it's all the track is there. You just literally have to raise, you have to raise the low mids by 20 dB, 30 dB to get it, because it's there. It doesn't sound like it's there, but it's there, right? If you're willing to find the edge. So what we would do in those scenes is I would take the track as if we were working on a Fred Wiseman documentary, which, by the way, Cootie is within the ranks of that style of filmmaking, for the record. So if we're doing like that type of film where it's very verite and it's just dialogue, then what we would do is we would split the track at the moment that someone presses play, and now we're listening to the track over the speakers. And then those two moments get extremely different treatment. So it's all dialogue right up until the moment where someone presses play, and then extreme EQing and room stimulation to make it feel like we're in that space. And then you just have to very carefully slice and dice so that you have the dialogue being the dialogue, and you have the track being the full intense track. And that's where, the tools that we have now with editing and Pro Tools and that kind of stuff really come in handy, because it's very surgical. But then because the track was there, then you can make it feel huge, even though it's literally a mono or stereo track recorded in a camera.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's been a while since I shot with that mini DV camera. I can't remember if it captures stereo or if it's mono. But then you said that subsequently you were using a Sony with probably with just like a shotgun mic mounted onto
the top. Yeah, I plug in.
Yeah, so you were probably just capturing mono, but this is like a really full, vibrant 5.1 track. So Paul, can you talk a bit about how how did you pull that apart and kind of make this into kind of the immersive mix that we hear now? Because it really, you really feel like you're in the studio with those guys when they're doing the thing. It's just a remarkable mix job.
Yeah, well, in the old school way, like we would do, in the cases where Cootie had been able to lay down 2 channels, we would just, if the dialogue was slightly favored on one track and the music was slightly favored on the other, then we would just take those 2 and treat them independently. Like some of the car driving scenes are perfect examples too, where I would take because the Rolling Stone journalist is sitting to the left a little bit, right? So he's favored a little bit in the left. So then I just work that as much as I can to get his dialogue. And then Kanye's got the track playing and it's more in the right. So I just take the right channel and just get as much bass out of it as I can. And it's all very, it's all fine tuning. But if you take the time and patience to work with it, eventually you end up with this thing where it feels like it's a multi-track, but it was really just 2 tracks, which are a little different. And again, I'll say it for the 99th time, it's all about recording the track well without distortion. And that's what Cootie did. Like if I can turn 400 hertz up 30 dB and it still sounds good, it's because he recorded it well. There's just no way around that. And it's like, if he hadn't, then we would have started talking about replacing it with a different track, which we did very, very, very rarely. There's like maybe 2 times in all 3 pieces where we did a little bit of like, what if we take the studio recording and drop it in and use it to manipulate, but it's so rare. Usually it's just working the tracks that Cootie recorded.
And you know what, Glenn, we were really like, even though, we had the limitations of not being able to approach this film like you would approach a movie and be able to like recreate a whole environment through Foley or whatnot. But we knew we wanted to give you something close to that experience of like, because most docs are treated like docs where it's like, okay, we're just going to use the natural sound. We wanted to like, how much can we kind of rebuild these experiences so they feel some cinematic and bigger than what they really are? And especially when we bring you into a space like the studio and how Kanye's listening to it from in the booth versus outside the booth, or when we go into an auditorium and the rumble of the crowd and the bass and like all these things we wanted to really build, you know what I'm saying? And those are sounds that Paul just orchestrated brilliantly that aren't necessarily sounds that we even captured, just to really create this body around it. So
Yeah, I think that's a great point, which is like, we talk about this sometimes on sound design for documentaries about like you're trying to get to the emotional truth of what happened rather than, just the literal truth of what your microphone captured. So Paul, for some of those sequences, I mean, did you do some Foley? Did you build some stuff out? What steps did you take to make it as cinematic as possible?
Cootie, I know we come back to this moment eventually. The very last, there's no Foley in the movie, but except for the very last thing we did on the last day of mixing was a little Cootie performed Foley of some MIDI keyboard that had to be in the movie. So there's almost none, but there's just a little bit. There's like, maybe, I don't know, 10 or 20 seconds of Foley, but it was recorded by our man himself right here in the studio. So Kanye is playing on a keyboard, and there was because he was playing the track, so there was no sound of him actually touching the keyboard. So we got the MIDI keyboard out, and Cootie did a little MIDI keyboard performance.
Can't play the piano at all, but hey.
But outside of that, very, very, very little. So
there's also a lot of live performance footage in the film. I'm thinking about just a couple of things that jumped out at me were the concert in Chicago that Common put together, which is when you kind of reconnect with Kanye after a long absence, and then there's the big the fashion show and the listening party in Madison Square Garden. Those are both really huge sequences. I mean, did you tap into house sound at all, or were you just out there with your shotgun mic, kind of just capturing, or like what was the production track on those big concert scenes?
Well, with that one, it was in camera at the Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, but there was see, this is what I love about the film is like from the naked eye when you watch it, it's so seamless that you would just think this was an experience. But it's, I mean, the undertones that and like these sound beds that Paul created through whether it's through drones or however his process was, but like to mimic, we wanted to create this sort of moment that wears up to like kind of like a frenzy with cameras and everything. And I remember we worked on that scene for a second because it transfers from it goes from like from Kanye and sort of this meditative like bliss of like in the moment of beauty in his own mind of this performance he's doing. So all of a sudden he's thrust into the limelight of all the people. And I remember like, there was this like sort of these ambient sounds that Paul was working with just to help create that overwhelming feeling to, you know what I mean? And it wasn't as simple as just, this is what the camera caught. It was definitely something that he was orchestrating and designing.
Well, Glenn, I'm sure this theme must emerge for you as you talk to like various people in different films, but it's like, especially in documentaries, it's everything that the lay person or the person who's even interested in the process might think of as how we get there. It's almost as though it's inverted, right? So like the stuff that Chika is describing right now, if I have to work the track that I have, which is just in camera, as much as I can to make it feel like you're there, then as he's sort of saying, the not obvious choice is that it's actually putting back the other things like the crowd or whatever it is, so that now it feels fuller. It's this sort of like bizarre subtractive process where you take some things out and you add other things in so as to maximize what the audience is feeling and what the emotion is. And it's kind of hard to describe if you're not there, but it's not as simple as go to this thing, but we're constantly doing this. We're in this manipulative method where we're taking things out, replacing those things with other things, And those two examples, though, the Common performance is a perfect example where that is definitely only in camera, and it's by adding the audience back. Like I was able to get everything I needed out of the camera recording, but then now there's no audience. So now it feels like, is there anybody there? Right. So that by creating that 5-1 feeling of the excitement of the crowd, the camera track is giving you what you need for the musical performance, And then similarly in the fashion show, that was one of the only, maybe the only place or one of only two places where we actually take the studio track and put it in, but not in the way that you might think. It's because it works 98% of the way through. And then there's a moment where the track drops again, and it at that moment, it was too much for Cody's camera. Like, it just was, the track just wasn't good. So there we drop in the track, but make it feel like you're there. So just to give us that final push, we used the recorded track. But.
So, one of the things I really responded to about the documentary is, it would have been a very much more typical approach to have some talking heads come in and talk to us about, set the context and tell us why Kanye is an important figure in the, and why we should be, taking this journey. But obviously, Coodie and Chike, you guys took a very different approach. And part of it is, Coodie, this documentary is about you as well, right? You are part of this story as well. And I love your voiceover. I love the intimacy of it. Can you talk about the process of creating the voiceover and even like how you mic'd it and like how you performed it?
Well, I say that our manager was saying I should put myself in the doc for sure, but that was really, you could see in every scene with people like, "What up, Coodie?" and all of that was going to be done. And then our editor Jason Harper, he suggested that I narrated. He said, "Man, I didn't think I had a voice for no narration at all, even though I did comedy, but I didn't think that." And when that happened, that's when we called in Jay Ivy to write, to help write the narration. Max, between me, Chike, Max, and Jay Ivy, we nailed that. And then when we got with Paul and we went to do it, it was and then Paul probably can explain technically everything, but as far as like me doing it, it was draining.
Well, I was going to say
it was no fun for you.
That's where, I don't know. As I said before, when I said these guys are in the same, in my opinion, the same class as people like Fred Wiseman. Like a lot of documentary filmmaking is really just hard work. Like, it's just really, like, you just have to shoot a lot of stuff. You just have to stay in the studio mixing until it's really right. And it's hard because it's a lot of times you're working with compromised material. And this is the perfect example. So Coodie had done all this, as he just described, once he came to the place where he realized he was going to narrate, they did a lot of temp voiceover. And then they came to C5 and we started recording ADR, and, just a very, very standard approach, a large diaphragm, a U87 and a shotgun, right? But the 87 is what we used really in the movie. But then, he was here for weeks recording voiceover. It's just every day, just like hundreds and hundreds of takes. Like, it's just hard work.
His own
right?
project by itself. Like, that was his own thing. It was voiceover.
Right.
Exactly. And that's it's just pure stamina, because, like you said, he's used to being a performer on stage doing that, but this is a whole different thing. You go in the booth, you record the line, and then you've got, your co-director, your editor, your producer, the writer, on the talkbacks, and no, maybe not. And so another one, like, for days and days and days and days. And that's how you get there. And he just did it. He just put in the time.
I really appreciate that theme of putting in the time. Coodie, for you especially, but Chike as well. Like, you shot on this thing for 20 years. And like, were there parts of the process, like you stopped for a few years, you're very upfront about that in the documentary. Like, maybe things you and Kanye weren't as close during periods and you would stop. Did you ever sort of like, were there periods when you kind of lost faith in the process and you sort of think like this probably is not going to come together? And how did you push through that, I guess, is the real question.
Right. Well, I never stopped. I might have stopped filming Kanye, but we was filming so many people within Kanye. Even when I was filming Kanye, we was filming like Pitbull and John Legend and Jay Ivy. I was documenting Jay Ivy. So I never stopped filming. But then, when we separated, I just had 100% faith because not for nothing, when he would do something like the Taylor Swift moment, and I'm like, damn, I wish I was there to tell him don't do that, But then I thought about it like, well, that makes the footage more valuable too. You know what I mean? So I knew that it was one day the footage was going to be, everything that we did was going to be seen. I didn't know when. We was going to do it a few times before, and Kanye wasn't ready the first time. The second time, in 2014, they, his team stopped it for whatever reason, and then he had a mental breakdown after that, which I feel like he was crying out for help the time he wanted me and Chike to do the doc then. And then we just, took another approach and made it happen ourselves. And that's when, that's why we see it right now on Netflix. But but yeah, it was I never get. And then I had Chike too, and me and Chike were doing music videos. Then God had us do our first documentary, which was Benji, ESPN 30 for 30, which we learned so much from our producers Ted Schillinger and Amani Martin, and we kept going. So it never was no downtime where I was like, oh man, I'm just gonna give up, and we was always moving.
One of the things that really stood out for me and watch the film is how vulnerable Kanye is, and how how open he was to you filming him from the beginning. But also, something that really struck me was clearly how much love you guys have for him. I'm thinking about some of the stuff that you captured in the Dominican Republic when he's sort of, I guess, having kind of a manic phase. And you talk in there about it like you had not seen this side of him before, and he's kind of talking crazy and kind of getting himself all wound up. And then you stop the camera and you're like, this isn't right to capture this. And I think a lot of other filmmakers would have been like, oh, this is good stuff. I'm going to get this. This is so. I just wanted to just express my appreciation for your humanity and the way you guys clearly love him, and the way you kind of explore how complicated he is, but never in an exploitive way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kanye was always my brother. You see, we had like 500 hours of footage on Kanye, but it was, years of us being connected. You know what I mean? So it was more than just filming. We lived in the W together. We came up in Chicago when he was young and I was older. So I would take him around. I would go grab him when we'd go places, and he'd come up to the barbershop, play beats. And so it was a relationship, but he was definitely a little brother, which I always wanted. I think I found a little brother in Kanye and in Chike. I always wanted I have 3 sisters, so I always used to want a little brother. And then here go my 2 little brothers because they're younger than me.
But also, what I spoke of before about Coodie and I and us having our different strengths, this is again another strength that it's just a gift that he has, and just in life. And I think it's perfect that he decided to pick directing to be able to utilize this particular gift that he has. But it's the ability to like make people feel very comfortable very quickly with him, and it's because he's very non-judgmental. So he creates this space where you feel very comfortable, just being 100% yourself. And I think that's the vulnerability that you get from Kanye. And I think it is because they're just friends, but it's also Coodie's able to have that with strangers. So it's just a special gift that he has that makes him an amazing director because of that, so.
I can only imagine that this must have been hard for Kanye to watch. What was his reaction to the film?
Well, we only seen him watch one. He came to the premiere and, he was laughing, and, I'm pretty sure he was emotional seeing his mom, but, I sent him that footage a while back of his mom talking to him. Definitely the giant looks in the mirror, like right before he went to go meet with Trump. I ran across that footage that Donda actually made me send to him because I kept running into it, and I'm like, wait a minute, she telling me to send this to Kanye, and I sent it. But so he was seeing that, but I know he after the premiere he thanked me. You know what I mean? For the first time. In whatever years, this 20-some years, he thanked me and Chike, and so he loved it. But the other 2, I'm not sure. I know he gonna love 2, 3. I know it would be hard, and I used to tell him before when we had the symbol and the cuts, I'm like, Kanye, I want you to watch these, but you have to watch it with everybody that was there at the beginning with you that loved you. And we always say, no, you can't let your imagination get in the way of God's manifestation. So instead of that happening, which never happened because he went out to France or whatever, then he wanted creative control after that. So it got a little crazy. But when he came to the premiere, God made it where he was around everybody who was there at the beginning with him, and celebrities that's around him now to watch it with him. So God made it even more special, which we cut a piece that we were going to put at the end of 3, that premiere, because Danny was there with Channel Zero. And, real quick, I just got to say this real quick, because ever since we've been on this interview, right, and Paul's on here. I'm hearing everything outside, like in trucks. I'm like, oh, Paul's on here.
Yeah.
I want to do just because you don't hear Paul. I don't even think that way when I do the interviews.
Great.
It does make you think about it differently. Well, other than that truck, you were totally clear the whole time.
Perfect, but yeah, that I think I finished my point. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, it's a very powerful documentary, and I must say you've got probably the most intense dentist scene I have ever seen.
It was definitely tough for Kaye at the time, but Kaye's so strong, man. It was just amazing to see how he just went from the dentist's office to doing everything he was doing like it didn't happen. So that's the type of person. His passion just guided him all the way through. He ain't even feel no pain.
Coody, you mentioned before that Hoop Dreams was really important to you, and it was a big influence and kind of inspired you to do this. I guess for both you and Chike, how do you hope this film kind of lands with maybe young people who are thinking about making documentaries or looking at film as a form of expression? What do you hope they take away from your film?
I mean, I definitely hope, aspiring filmmakers, I just hope they appreciate the marathon, the time, the work that it takes. It's not an overnight thing, and it's a thing of passion. For us, we never thought about it as like a tool that would make money for us. Like, it was just, we wanted to bring these stories to the world because we were passionate about the storytelling process. And in particular, Coody started this journey, passionate about the subject as far as like, and seeing how far that would take him. And then as our lives, as we met and then experienced more life started to impede on this process because we were learning more. Our spirituality was growing. Then it became about, man, we have something here that's a tool that could show people how to move in their passion. It's actually showing somebody speak things into fruition that happened some X amount of years later. And these are things that you only hear about, but you never get a chance to show. So, and we were able to, I think, make something even more special than maybe Coody even intended when he first started filming. So it's a twofold thing. I think for filmmakers, it's just the dedication that it takes and the hard work that it takes and the drive. And I think for people that aren't filmmakers, but just to struggle with just getting up every day and trying to figure out what they love and having enough faith to move in that, here's a blueprint for that. So here's something that can maybe just inspire you, for that. And something that the people that made the movie, we can go back and look at the film and it can be a source of inspiration for ourselves as well. So,
yeah, like moving in your genius, and that's not, being a musician, a filmmaker. It's your genius. Paul is a genius. You know what I mean? And you're a genius, Glenn. You know what I'm saying? So it's like just moving that genius and never stop, never quit, keep going no matter what comes, and learn from the obstacles that come in your way. But understand that God's taking you on a whole nother direction. So. That and actually that's the comments that we've been getting since the movie been out. Like, people like, man, I went in the studio, I picked up a camera, I picked up a paintbrush. People coming and they saying things like, man, you saved my son's life. Like, parents will come up to us and say things like that, and it's like, wow, it's actually doing exactly what God wanted it to do.
Fantastic. Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you taking the time today to talk to us about this really remarkable film and the great soundtrack. The design and the mix are just fantastic. So you have a lot to be proud of. And thanks for coming on the show and talking to us about it.
Appreciate you, Glenn. Thank you so much for having me.
Great to see you, Paul, too, for sure.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you again to Coody, Chike, and Paul for sharing their insights today into the making of Genius, a Kanye trilogy. And if you haven't seen the film yet, you can catch all 3 parts right now on Netflix. You should do that. You can find a link, as always, in our show notes. I'd also like to thank our friends at Netflix for helping us pull this conversation together. So before you go, please make sure you're subscribed to us, the Dolby Institute podcast. We've got some very big episodes planned for you in the coming weeks. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. via the links in our show notes or simply by searching for Dolby in your favorite podcast app. Until then, thanks again for joining us. This has been Sound and Image Lab, brought to you by the Dolby Institute. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with production support by Taylor Hines, and our production coordinator is Sunny Chen. Thank you for listening.